On today's show, it's another year of player capsules about the Atlanta Hawks. It begins today with part 1 of 2 with Glen Willis, and it's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1977 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday here in mid-May. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the pod anywhere you find your podcast. That includes YouTube, Apple, Spotify, etc. And be sure to tell your friends, colleagues, family, etc. about this podcast. In a second, I'll be joined by Glen Willis of ATL and 29 and Peachtree Hoops for part 1 of a 2-part discussion to begin our Player Capsule Series that we do each and every summer. But first, a little bit of a plug. I did a show on Friday night, late, focused on the reporting that the Hawks could elect to not hire anyone else actually in the front office. I would encourage you to listen to that. There hasn't been anything that's brand new on the development side of the Pobo search over the weekend, so that's still status quo as of that show on Friday. But one correction I need to actually issue right now is how I pronounce Onsi Saleh's name. So to be honest, everyone around the team and people around the team, generally speaking, just call him Onsi, which is all I've ever called him. And I was kindly corrected by someone around the organization, I would say, after they heard Friday night show. So my bet on that, it is not Onsi Saleh, it is Onsi Saleh. Onsi Saleh. Onsi Saleh. So that's my fault on that. I probably would just call him Onsi most of the time. That's what I always call him. But that's my fault. So own that. And if you're looking for pronunciation guides, that's what I was told in very clear format over the weekend. So all that said, he might be the lead decision maker for the Hawks at some point pretty soon. At the very least, he's currently the GM. He'll be in that role permanently. And whether that's number 1 or number 2, I talked about that a lot more on Friday night. Now, with that out of the way, we're back with this Player Capsule Series. We'll talk about it more in a second as I'll sort of tee it up with Glen on the podcast. But the last few summers, Glen's been joining me to talk about the entire roster, basically, in deep dive, player-by-player fashion. And part 1 of that series is today with Larry Nance Jr., a veteran hitting the free agent market this summer. And it's actually going to be a 2-part conversation because Glen and I always tend to go long. So part 1 is what you're listening to right now. And then part 2 will be available as soon as part 1 is available in your same podcast feed. So once part 1 is over, flip on over to part 2, listen to that podcast. And without any further delay, here we go with part 1 with myself and Glen. I'm joined once again by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29, doing a little bit of writing. I saw Peachtree Hoops back in the saddle over there. How are you, sir?
I'm good. That was rusty, man. I had to shake the rust off on that deadline in a while. Did a couple player reviews and do a couple of draft profiles coming up too, if I can find the time to do that. So Wes dragged me kind of back into the fold. I was happy to jump back in and help even if it can only be now and then based upon my crazy day job I have.
Listen, having done that job, Wes should have been bugging you until you said yes. Basically, that would have been the attempt that I would have done as well. So, look, you probably know by the title if you're listening or watching this podcast, but we're doing player capsules. And if you're new to the podcast, you may not know what this is. So Glen, number 1, has been incredibly gracious with his time the last few summers with me to kind of go through the roster player by player. And these are not like a season review, kind of is. We'll talk about the season that actually happened. We'll also talk about like the player and what they do, what they don't do well, all those things. And then a little bit of a look ahead as well as like what they could do in the future. This year, Glenn and I talked about this a little bit offline. We might save a lot of the younger like guys who are not going to go anywhere for later in the offseason. We did probably too many at the beginning last summer, and that's my fault. But these are fun. I like talking. It's instructive for me to hear what you think about these players. It also tells me and reminds me to dig back into guys that we talk about all season long, but then you don't do like a full-on look at necessarily once the summer gets here. The one we're doing today, Larry Nance Jr. is going to be a free agent. That's a big part of this as well. So a fun series. And again, for the 17th time, I will thank you for doing it in advance.
Yeah, no, these are some of the most fun things to do. It's like number 1 is Sicko Summer League preview. That's at the top. And then it's these. Yeah, I know we're almost there. So these are a lot of fun, and And I will say, I don't know if you agree, but as frustrating as aspects of the season was for the Hawks, this was a more fun season. So I think this is going to be more fun for me, at least for me. I don't know if listeners will agree, but it's good. They were a more fun team, and so I think these will be fun.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Not every listener will agree. I know that much, but I think this was a more the way that I would say it. I think I said this on the show. If I didn't, I probably should have. Last season, I was kind of ready at the end for it to be over. Not like rooting against them in the play-in, but it was like when they lost, it was like, all right, you kind of close the laptop and it's like, all right, that's the end of the season. This year it was kind of like, oh, this is I would have enjoyed covering more basketball this year. Like I wasn't as burnt out as I was a year ago, which maybe is something to do with me, maybe something to do with the team. But I think with a young team that's talented, yeah, there were injuries, there was frustration like there are with many teams. But I would second that in general about I think there's something to be said for an upward trajectory. I mean, you covered the team when I did back in the early trade days when they were kind of on the way up again after they had torn down. That was fun too. I enjoyed covering those teams as they were kind of rising with not that many expectations and all those things. And it's just different once you have expectations. It is different. And I think, by the way, that might start as soon as this coming season for the Hawks. It might be a little bit of a different bar to clear, but that's coming up later on.
Yeah, I mean, as everyone probably feels in some way or form, even though Trey's not putting any messaging that I know about there around pressure or whatever, but there has to be at least a latent feeling of pressure on the organization to improve the roster. Trey's, we talked about last time we were together here. We talked about the Trey buying into letting the young guys play a lot this year and stuff like that. And so, but I think it's time to bump this roster up talent wise, and hopefully that's something they can make happen this summer.
I think they will, and as they do, we'll cover that in depth. But I don't want to go too much of the preamble because you and I are capable of talking for a long time about any player. Basically, my example of this is that last year we went so long on Garrison Matthews that had to be two parts. Now that seems obscene and impossible, but that actually happened. I looked today. I was doing research back. I was like, oh, we literally went two parts on Garrison Matthews last summer.
That's hilarious.
Which we could probably do again. Maybe this will be two parts in the end. We'll see. Yeah. So Larry Nance Jr., interesting player. I wanted to kind of start with a interesting player, but not one that we've done before. Like Clint Capella is going to be one we have to do in a second. We'll save Trey and Zach and Dyson for later, etc. But Larry's interesting. Number one, he's going to be a free agent, as we'll talk about probably at the end of the show. But a newcomer to the team, a guy that you and I both like previous to the Hawks and also enjoy his work. And I'll say this at the beginning, like every single person I've ever dealt with in the NBA, team-wise, behind the scene, everyone loves Larry Nance Jr. I mean, everyone loves Larry Nance Jr. Media, everybody loves Larry Nance Jr. And you can definitely kind of see why if you cover him for a couple of months. But he just finished his 10th NBA season. He's 32 years old. And something we just talked about before we started recording, actually, he played less than I remembered him playing. Like, I remember all the things that happened to him this year. And he even said on social media this week that it was like the hardest year of his career. And he likes Atlanta. That wasn't why. It was because of all the injuries, I assume. Like, he didn't get into the depth about that, but it was like he had two major injuries, ended up playing only 24 games and under 500 minutes. Like that, it kind of surprised me even if I knew it. Does that make sense to you? Like, I feel like he was just like around more than he actually ended up playing.
It felt like more because there were times when he gave them a lot. There were times when the defensive, what I know, we'll talk about the defensive fit and all that sort of stuff. But we've gone a few seasons without really having any sort of volume shooting at the 5 position. He gave them that. He's super trustworthy with the ball, makes good, smart, crisp decisions, responsible decisions with the ball in DHO. Passing and stuff like that. So he's just like a super professional, very constructive player who knows he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. And I find that enjoyable. But I thought the contrast to Clint really being a guy who's only gonna finish at the rim, insert your laugh track there if you want to, listeners, and Yaka's volume shooting ticked up a little bit, like above the break stuff, but Nance took every single wide open three ever presented to him, and I thought that was a real boost for their spacing and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have it in bold. You can't see my notes, which is part of the fun of these podcasts, but I have pros pro in bold. Like executes systems on offense, on defense, does what the coaches wants him to do. He has limitations that we'll talk about, obviously. Not a star player at this point in time, getting on the older side, but like just does what you want him to do. Can also fill different roles, which we'll also talk about, like played some 4, played some 5. He's kind of a combo big, and the versatility that kind of allows is actually pretty attractive if you're looking at like his future either in Atlanta or somewhere else. This was brought to you by Monarch Money, and we've done this in the past, I'm sure, but at times I've looked back at my bank account and wonder where all my money happened to go between dining out, online shopping, entertainment stuff. It's easy to lose track sometimes, and that's where Monarch Money comes in for you. Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility, control of your finances. And Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's instead a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, your investments, and your spending all in one place. You can stop managing your money and start building wealth instead. When I started using Monarch Money, I actually started realizing how much money I was spending on food and all kinds of different things each week. And it's just one example. And now I budget smarter and save more instead of juggling multiple apps. You can actually use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals all in one place. And if you want to manage your money in conjunction with your partner, it can be smoother than ever at Monarch Money. You can track shared accounts, personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without any of the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA, 50% off your first year. I mentioned the lack of playing time. There was 2 reasons for that I think people need to be refreshed by. In the first half of the season, generally speaking, he was mostly healthy, but there were a lot of nights where you had Capella, Okongwu, and Nance all healthy, and Nance would just take DNP CDs, basically. And I know that you and I on this show and on your show said the words, Larry Nance is probably too good to not play, but also that was the world they were living in. Jalen was healthy at this point in time, and I think from what I can gather from the Hawks, not exclusively this way, they viewed him primarily as a center. I know he's not a huge 7-foot guy. To use your parlance, insert laugh track here about 7-footers, but they viewed him primarily as a center, and that meant that when you had a Capella and a Okongwu available, there were only 48 minutes of the position, and that led to Larry taking some DNPs and again handling it really well, but kind of being overqualified to not play. And then the second reason why he didn't play more was that he had 2 injuries. Now everyone remembers the last one, where he missed the rest of the season, about 2 months, with this very, honestly, a pretty strange injury, a non-displaced fracture of his right medial femoral condyle, which was like a pretty rare injury to get, and everyone said that. But before that, actually, he missed about a month from like late December to late January with a broken bone in his hand, which I didn't forget, but it was like, that seems like it's so long ago, but that happened. He missed like 16 games the first time, and then he missed the rest of the season after that. So it was like a half season of him being a cog, but with an occasional DNP, and then a half season basically where he just wasn't available. And that leads you to 24 games and not very much time. What did you make of, like, let's just say, obviously, when he was healthy? What did you make of him and the role he played generally for the team? Like, what they asked him to do, was it appropriate? Like, him being basically a backup center most of the time with the occasional sprinkling of playing next to Okongwu mostly.
Yeah, so I think the value tilted towards offense, and quite a bit. We talked about the shooting a minute ago, but he's a good passer. He's just really solid at DHO and great footwork and just moves the ball. The ball doesn't stick with him, all that sort of stuff. And I know I use this term a lot. Maybe I'm using it too much. Hopefully not. But one of the challenges of the pairing of Capella and Okongwu over these years has been up until this year, Okongwu had to kind of play within the Capella offensive template, which is rolling to the rim, all that sort of stuff, right? Now, this year, they kind of flipped the script a little bit, especially after they put Onyeka in the starting lineup. But Nance can play within the Onyeka template, like DHO, pass, handle, shoot, all that sort of stuff. And Clint's was never going to be able to kind of fit into that. And so for me, having continuity of scheme, style, plays you're running, actions you're running, across different kind of first and second units helps your team. Like when a different kind of player has to come on and you have to kind of basically stop running half of what you run because that player can't function in it. To me, that's disruptive to what they're doing. So on offense, I thought he was helpful in the sense that they didn't have to change it. When it was like when Clint wasn't playing and Nance was healthy and it was Onyeka and Nance, they could just run the same stuff regardless of whether it was Onyeka or Nance on the floor. And I thought that was one of the most helpful aspects to the skill set he brought to the floor.
I would agree for sure. And, I looked at some of I won't share all the data because it's just too much. Some of it's granular and it's a podcast. But he ended up playing like 2/3 of his minutes, according to some of like the cleaning the glass stuff at center. So there was some power forward in there. Mostly when Jalen had gone down and when they didn't have options, like they kind of were forced to play him more, and that made sense. But barely played at all with Clint. There was a couple possessions, but like not a lot. It was mostly either center or with Okongwu. Or maybe if you say him and Don Barlow playing together was like, who's the center? I'm not really sure who the center is. There's some of those minutes, but it's mostly was that. And you mentioned the offense. I want to go to the offense, but I do want to just kind of tee it up with what shows in the numbers about how the team played. Basically, when Larry was playing center on offense, the offense was pretty good. It was the defense that really struggled with Nance at center, which to me empirically just makes sense to me. Like, he's not a full-time anchor who's going to cover everybody defensively. He could do his job, but on defense, when they played him at the 4 with a Okongwu or even with a Capella, they were actually really good defensively when he was playing the 4 because suddenly they're really big and they have kind of 2 center look. But then on offense, him at the 4 led to some pretty ugly numbers. Again, it's not a huge sample size. But again, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, like just that alone, the numbers kind of paint the picture that you would expect with a guy who is more offense leaning probably at center. But if you throw him out there at the 4, he isn't a dynamic offensive player compared to most power forwards in the modern NBA. Does that make sense to you? Like all those numbers I just shared?
Yeah, it does. And going on memory here, and I get older every day, so we'll see if I'm remembering correctly. A lot of that when it was in Onyeka Nance is just in the weak side corner, kind of creating space. And so from that vantage point, he wasn't able to kind of lean into other things that he can do. One of the things I love, one of the reasons probably everyone seems to love Nance is that he takes the assignment. He does what's asked of him, and he goes out and he's a team guy, puts his team first, all that sort of stuff. And you notice that. But I mean, if you're going to put a hybrid 4-5 or whatever you want to call him in the weak side corner, he's about as good as the Hawks could possibly have in that role. But he's very good with the ball in his hands, like really, really good with the ball in his hands. Like I said, the ball doesn't stick and stuff. So, but I could see where there's some clunkiness there. And the Hawks rightly were prioritizing Onyeka, because his development is crucial for them continuing to take steps forward. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I have a little bit different orientation now. Like the playoffs are kind of reshaping the way that teams are leaning into 2 big lineups. Like Houston running a lot of zones so they could put Şengün and Adams on the floor together. You got OKC and Denver having basically a zone off for half the feels like half the game that they're in. The Hawks don't really have the personnel to kind of lean zone, and Quinn's never had an inclination kind of just go that way. But when you look at some of the themes around the league, it's like, should they have like leaned into that a little bit? Could they have? Now, when Nance got hurt in the season, there was really nothing they could do, in that sense. But when Clint was down, if Nance were still healthy, could they have played 12 minutes of zone a night to get Onyeka and Nance on the floor together? It's an interesting thing to think about. It's kind of crazy how much zone we're watching in these playoffs, and that's impacting my look back at Nance and the ways that I don't, could Quinn have kind of leaned into some zone to facilitate some of that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's and look, you're better at the X's and O's stuff than I am, and it is logical. I would also, I know you know this, but just to say it out loud, like the game planning aspects of the playoffs are just so much different than they are in the regular season, to where like you're tailoring it to an opponent in a way where like maybe it would be hard. I don't know if it would be, but maybe to me, like maybe it would be harder to run that kind of stuff when you don't know who you're playing each and every night. And like you're going, like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me. You're 100% right. There's been a lot of 2 big lineups in these playoffs that produce questions, and they do. Like I generally, the league has been, this is very too broad and too vague of a statement, but since I don't know, the middle of 2010s, the league started trending smaller. You got Golden State and what they were doing, and like these models of teams. And it's not been that. It's not always. I think that was probably overblown to some degree. Like a lot of teams were still playing traditional lineups, etc. But now it's kind of more in vogue to play these two bigs together. And the Hawks could have played Nance more at the 4. They could have always tried that a little bit more. But you're right. Also, the chances for him to do that would have probably been at the second half of the season when he wasn't available. So it's like I don't know, 6 one half dozen the other, how they were going to navigate that. But you're right. There was probably a time of the season when it would have been like, you know what? Maybe we could have tried this a little bit more than they actually did. More experimenting. And it maybe could have been successful because again, Larry knows how to execute and he will buy in. He will do what you ask him to do, which is actually a valuable thing, especially for a veteran. Like to do that with a young guy over 82 games would be really hard. Like to use Mo Gay as an example or Don Barlow as an example. Like it's hard to like throw that on that kind of young guy who's really inexperienced. With Larry, he's played every coverage. He's done all this stuff before. You would assume.
Yeah. He's oldish like me, so he's seen everything, done everything. So.
Oldish like you. No. So I mean, you mentioned it before, but I think the calling card for Nance this year was the offense of the shooting. He had his best shooting season ever. Now, again, small sample size, and that's part of this. He shot 44.7% from 3. I think even if you ask Larry, who's a pretty candid guy, he would probably tell you that's not sustainable. I don't think Larry's a 45% three-point shooter.
Really?
I mean, maybe he wouldn't agree, but I'll say it for you. Maybe he won't yell at me too much. He's a good shooter. He is a good shooter, but in his career, it's been like that 35, 36% range. And early, it's actually a great success story. When he was drafted out of Wyoming, he wasn't really shooting at all. Like he's one of those like great examples of a guy who's, as he gets older and loses a little bit of that burst, you make up for that with your being able to space the floor. He's done a good job with that, but ended up with 63% true shooting for the season. Again, most of that 3-pointers, but he shot it really well. And it was also just his role. I mean, speaking of him executing the system, he took 49% of his shots from 3 this year. And that's a career high for him by a lot. It's like, what do you make of that? Is he? I don't want to use it. He's not a specialist. He's not Garrison Matthews. But does that make sense in the way they kind of had to use him for this team? Is it more of like what he can and can't do now? Like, what is Larry Nance in a vacuum at 32? Is he mostly going to be giving you offense as a shooter? I know he can do more than that, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that, and I mean, and you know, I love what he does in DHO. He moves when. The difference in a veteran and a young guy, like when a center turns towards the DHO and the defense blows it up, a veteran just immediately turns in the opposite direction and finds a different person to DHO with. Where a young guy is like, oh, you know, you have that second and a half of like, what do I do? Where do I go with this? That sort of thing, you know. And that's the difference in having a veteran kind of executing action like that. The shooting, I mean, I think he's a really, really good shooter. And when you look at the shooting results, if you look back at New Orleans, didn't really have a point guard, didn't really have a point, you know. And so playing with Trey, I think, must have been just a breath of fresh air for him because, you know, Trey creates so much, you know, gravity towards him and so much defensive attention is drawn towards him that Larry was getting, you know, wide open shots. And so I think part of the improvement is not just, you know, random shots going in. I think he was getting better shots because he was playing a better point guard.
No, that's true. I mean, I think if you gave him exactly the shot diet he had this year, he would have made more of them than he did in his career, but probably less than he actually made would be my guess. Like I think if you told me he shot 39% on those shots, it would be like, okay, makes total sense. He is a real shooter, and like you watch him more. I mean, obviously you don't want to overweight this, but like he has a really nice stroke. It's repeatable, good mechanics. Like he knows what he's doing there. You mentioned the DHO game. Like he's been a good passer his whole career, basically. Like 4 assists per 100 possessions as a big is really impressive. He did have his worst offensive rebounding season this year, but that makes total sense with what we just talked about. Like he was playing on the perimeter a lot more, and if you're taking a lot of threes, it's hard to get offensive rebounds. Also, it's natural to have that go down as you get older. Like Larry used to be a really, really, really good athlete, and now he's like a pretty good athlete, I think. Like not a great one. That's just time. I mean, he's not going to be able to. But if you see him load up, he had a couple big dunks this year. Like he can still do it a little bit. I think play in, play out. He's not quite the same like nuclear. He was a dunk contest guy. Like he was a big time leaper dunker guy. I think he's a little bit less than that now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, he entered the league as kind of a rim runner, you know, vertical athlete, and that sort of thing. And the ball handling and shooting is really something he's worked to develop across his career. And smart for guys who are like, I'm getting older. I might not be able to be the high flying ducker that I was when I was 25 years old. And so you have to kind of lean into some new skills and things like that. But I mean, I enjoy him a lot. I mean, I enjoy watching him play a lot. And I will talk about some of the challenges on defense. But
yeah,
just a total pro, knows what to do with the ball. And it's just a really helpful guy on that end of the floor.
All right, that is it for part 1 of 2 with myself and Glen Willis talking about all things Larry Nance Jr. in player capsule fashion. Part 2 should be available in this same podcast feed right now. So if you're listening to this podcast on Apple or Spotify on the audio side, it should be there right alongside part 1. If you're watching on YouTube, click on over the same podcast. You should be finding the show in podcast form on that platform on the YouTube Locked On Hawks site. And please subscribe to this podcast on those platforms and anywhere else you listen to the podcast. Plus, please follow us on X/Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And again, one more time, part 2 is available right now, and we'll see you all next time.